This video is about pre-formatted text, which takes two main categories, one being entity references and the other being computer code, and sort of breaks both of those down. So in the entity references part, it's how do you insert things or characters that are usually used to create the web page, how do you insert that into the web page? And so we'll see how to put those things in, as well as special characters like the ampersand, the greater than, less than sign, quotation marks, what have you. Also, in the second part of that, we'll talk about you can do it with Unicode as well. So these characters are pre-named, and you can also use them using Unicode characters or Unicode codes. The second part of the video, we'll talk about how do you insert computer code or monoscript or monospace script things into your text. You can do it both inline, and you can do it in a big block where you actually preserve the white spacing of what you want to put in there, which may be helpful if you want to insert things like computer code or poetry or text that you actually want to reserve how the white spaces are. So we're going to jump into this. The first part, of course, we'll talk about entity names. And if you look here, um, all I did was I put all this in paragraph tags separated by horizontal rules. And the reason I did that is I didn't want to cloud the use of these entity references with any other. I could have put the with any other tags. I could have put this in list or put it all in a table, but I didn't want to cloud that. I want to keep this sort of clean so we could focus on the entity tags and entity references. And so here on line 11, where I'm entering this paragraph, I show how you would code an actual ampersand. So instead of just putting an ampersand, which may conflict or may confuse the computer with other things that you would use in your HTML, if you want to use an ampersand symbol, then the best way to do it is to put the ampersand followed by AMP and the semicolon. And that's actually the entity name for putting in an ampersand. So if you come here and look over here in the browser, you see that the entity name ampersand AMP semicolon actually generates a ampersand. Uh, Probably more pertinent for HTML. You use a lot of less than, greater than symbols, so they actually have entity names for less than, greater than. All the entity names begin with the ampersand, and then they have the name, which for less than is LT, and then they're followed by the semicolon. Now, in some browsers, you don't have to use the semicolon, but when we talk about validation, to validate, to make sure that you're as cross-browser compatible as you can be and as past and future compatible as you can be, you put the semicolon in there. So this is the entity name for the less than symbol. And if we go back over here and look at the browser, you can see there's the less than symbol generated by the ampersand LT semicolon entity name. Just to go back down over here to the HTML, there's the greater than entity name, the quotation mark entity name, the copyright signal entity name, and I didn't put a semicolon there. I'll put one there now. Um, there is the degree. So if you're doing Fahrenheit or Celsius, there's a degree entity name. This one down here on line 7 is non-breaking space. So if you actually wanted to enter spaces, because keep in mind, browsers normally ignore extra white space. And so if you wanted to enter spaces, you could put in the ampersand NBSP semicolon entity name, and that actually inserts a space, and the browser recognizes that as a space. So here I inserted 4 spaces. So if we go back over here to the browser, we can see there's the greater than symbol, there's a quotation mark there, there is the copyright symbol, the degree symbol, and then you can see between the word space and end there are extra spaces in there, and that was entered by the ampersand NBSP non-breaking space semicolon entity reference. Okay, and so I give an example down here. The code for that example is here. Let's say if you wanted to actually have the browser print out the tag on the screen, an anchor tag with a link to a website. So this is an example of that. So it shows that I use this entity name here for the less than, then the A for the A anchor, then the reference, then I put a quotation mark there with that entity name. I put in the URL, end it with another quotation mark here, then the greater than sign to end the anchor tag, then GT, which will actually be my link, and then the less than, and then the end anchor here with the greater than over here. And so that all translates into, if you go back over here to the browser, that all translates into this. Okay, so that's how you can do it using actually entity names. And there's a website. Go up here. I already have it loaded in the browser. There's a website with this URL up here. If you actually wanted to view all the entity names that are out there, I'll scroll up here. And so these are some of the reserved ones here. And you can actually, if you go down here lower, all of them have a corresponding Unicode, which is a more universal uh, coding than ASCII. ASCII is a subset of Unicode. And so if you look, you can get to this by doing the ampersand, the pound sign, and a Unicode number. Or most of all these do have an actual entity name. So you have a choice here. And so if you scroll down, you can just see all of the things that you have access to. And so what I did back over here with this website is I showed method 2, which is an example, and there's the URL of the website I just showed you. I showed an example of using the Unicode name. So if you come over here to line 22 through line 29, you see I've used Unicode names here instead of the, Unicode numbers here instead of the actual entity names. And so if you refer to the chart, it'll do that. You can see that, and then if I scroll up here on the browser, you can see that I generated the cent sign, the pound sign, the upside down exclamation point or the inverted exclamation point, the inverted question mark, the symbol that's usually used to indicate sections. There's some built-in fractions, 1/4, 1/2, and 3/4. So these are ways that you can put these symbols, these things into your text on your website very easily. Okay, so the next part I want to talk about, well, what if you wanted to enter something that looked like computer code into your web page? And so if you see here what I've done on line 34, you can do it inline. So if I had a small snippet of code that I wanted to highlight in a paragraph, I would do it something like this using the code tag. And so you see here the sentence reads, the syntax for an if statement is, and then I want it to show up looking like code, and that's usually the monospace, which means that every character has the same spacing, and that's what's usually typically used for code. And so if you look at this over here in the browser, scroll up, you can see here that the syntax for an if statement is, and then if you look here, this text is actually formatted in monospace, and so that's what typical textbooks use to display code. And then once I ended the code tag, then it goes back to normal text there. So now the next part is, what if I wanted to express a snippet of code, let's just say a switch statement. So over here on line 40, I want to put a switch statement into my website. Well, if I just put it in paragraph form, what's going to happen is the browser is going to ignore all white space, and it's just going to kill my formatting. And so that's not what we want. So if I look at this over here in the browser, what has happened is the browser has turned all the spacing, it's gotten rid of all the spacing, so it comes out on one line, which isn't very helpful when you're looking at code. What we want is we want it to look like this. We want it to look all the indentions preserved, and it's very nice that it comes into monoscript. And so what happens, so the way to do that is to use the pre-tag, P-R-E. And so using the PRE tag, that stands for pre-formatted. So it tells the browser that this text is pre-formatted. Keep it as is, all the spacing, all the line breaks, all of that. And so if you see from line 49 to 50, that's in between the pre-tag, and that's what actually generated this over here in the browser. So that's very nice. Another instance where you might want to do something like this is for poetry, preserving the lines and the formatting of poems. And so, if you can see, I wrote a little poem here about the good word. And if I just use plain paragraph tags, once again, over here in the browser, I just get straight text because the spacing is ignored. But if I use the pre-tags over here in the browser, I will get it actually formatted. Now, you might say, well, what if I don't want monospace? Well, the answer to that, of course, is you can change the font of the pre-tag if you want to. So if I wanted my poetry to maintain the spacing and the lines, but I wanted a different font, I can do that through CSS, which we'll get to soon. Um, this last example here is very interesting, and it really drives home, I feel, uh, what is meant by understanding and using the semantics. If you see here, I've done the switch statement again, but inside the pre tag, the pre-formatted tag, I've actually put the code tag in there. Now, I don't need that. As we saw before, the pre-tag will give me all the formatting that I want. It will preserve all the spaces and the indentions and the line breaks, and at the same time, it will give me the monospace. Uh, that's very nice. So why do I put the code tag in here? Well, once again, it's semantically correct. What it's saying here is that I am actually wanting to print out code. So let's take the poetry example. Let's say if I had both a poem and code in the same HTML file, and I wanted to change the font, and I had them both in pre-tags and I didn't use the code tag. If I wanted to change the font of the poem and not change the font of the code, if I have both of them in pre-tags, then I'm unable to do so. Um, but if I put all my code inside of a code tag, then semantically I'm saying that this is code that I want to show on the screen, and so whatever changes I make to code um, will show just on the code and not mess up any other formatting that I have. So once again, thinking through the design of our web pages using semantics, that's what the HTML is for. It's to identify what we mean, and then we'll leave the formatting to the CSS. And that concludes this